I find it very hard to identify with the nomenclature of the left. The left in general is anti-working class. So I don't have much in common with them. Unlike the left I was brought up in, and the left that I identify with, and the more I see and hear of them, I hear them hate the working class. The whole scenario and the whole agenda of the left from the working class and people who do things and people who think things. So it becomes a question of how you think and not the class position. And for that reason, socialists in Britain and other parts of the world can quite happily have the socialism without the working class. In fact, they think it would be better without the working class. I would like the left to recognise that the struggle of the working class is the struggle for socialism, not directly but indirectly, and they will never understand how we will achieve power for the working class because we intend to do it ourselves. We don't want leaders to do it for us. And anarchists, above all people, should know this. We aren't delegating our future in the hands of some middle-class intellectuals or people who are following a political fad. The class struggle is more important than that.
Where were you born?
I thought you were going to say, how was I born? I was born in Jarrah. We live in Hebburn, which is the next town. My dad was a coal miner and a shipyard worker.
It's hard when folks can't find their work where they were bred and born. When I was young, I always thought I'd bide amidst the corn.
They had a pig that they kept on his little ranch, and the pig used to come in and out of the kitchen, and it was like a family pet. And we used to play with it, chase it up and down the garden, and it was a jolly soul. We'd lie down and go to sleep in the living room. And then my uncle took my cousins with the pig to the abattoir, and I had never seen or contemplated how with the food on your plate came from an animal in the field. And we watched the pig being slaughtered, and I became a vegetarian the day after and refused any kind of meat or fish. Of course, my mum, being Irish, she kidded me about a few things for a while. Like she'd tell me sausages weren't meat, and she'd say, "What's that kind of animal would a sausage come from?" And I couldn't think of anything that looked like a sausage. No. It took a while till it came through, and it was a constant source of conflict at school. Not so much with the other kids, but with the teachers, who regarded it as a kind of a challenge that I would dare think something they hadn't told me. And I became a vegan in 1989, and probably the only vegan coal miner in the whole world, and the lads reckoned it was because the rest had died out.
So you very quickly became an anarchist. Why was that Why that transition? What was wrong with the
Well,
PCL? You know,
it's a bit like Methodism and the Catholic Church. I could never understand why my dad became a Methodist instead of the Catholics. And he said, because the Catholics come between me and God. They have lots of layers of different saints and angels that you go through before you get to speak to God. And you might not ever speak to God because you have to do it through the priest or the archbishop or the pope. With Methodists, he was a primitive Methodist. He believed you could talk directly to God. Well, Anarchism was a bit like that. In order to get to a state of society that we wanted to be, the Communist Party said you had to have various layers to go through first of bureaucracy and leadership and the state before you could achieve this. And even then, the state would determine for you how far you could go, how much freedom you could have. Whereas the anarchists spoke about going directly to the kind of society we wanted to. That didn't mean that at any one time you can move directly to a higher stage of society, but it meant that that's what you aspired to, and you put no blocks in the way of it. And I found that the whole thing was very exciting. We spent most of our time at the ILP hall. The ILP had been very strong at Tyneside, and there was only the few ancient survivors left, and they had a big hall. Well, we took it over. The young people used to have parties there all night, and poetry readings and jazz sessions and debates. And some of the suffragettes, there was an old suffragette woman who was, she'd bring along spirits to put on your feet so they didn't blister. And she was very badly scarred, this woman. And she had been a beautiful girl as in the ILP. And she'd rescued a family from a building and become very burnt. But she was a very famous woman. But we also had a woman, an old man called Barney Mason, I think was his name. And I didn't realise who he was until later on. But this Barney had been a member of the IWW, and he served with them in San Francisco and all over America and Canada and Australia. And he came back and he used to speak on the ILP's platforms in the big market in Newcastle. And they were wonderful speakers. And they sort of introduced me to that kind of stump oratory. But the Communist Party used to speak in the big market as well, which was a kind of Hyde Park corner. And the anarchists and the Communist Party. So it's quite an education.
So perhaps you could begin by telling us how you became a miner and a delegate and the background to the strike. Yeah,
well my dad was a miner all of my life. As I say, my granddad as well. And really 7 generations of my family have been coal miners. So in a way, I was kind of destined to be a miner, although I tried very hard not to be the first. By the time I was 17, I went to the pit, which was quite late to go to the mining. But I was working 60 hours a week for £1.10. At the pit, I work 37-hour week, and you got a fiver. But also, I think the political traditions of the miners was very important to me as well. I'd only been at the mine 2 years or so when the Wilson closure program started, and in a period of 10 years, they transferred 10,000 miners from Northumberland and Durham and Scotland into Yorkshire and Nottingham with wives and families. This is a mass movement of people from the north down to what we considered the south. And it just so happened that I fell in love with an art student. So at just turned 18, we eloped to Scotland to get married because her parents wouldn't give permission for to get word. But they threatened to make her a ward of court and things like that. And basically, her family had just got out of the pits, and their daughter was going to high school and the art school. So anyway, we went to Doncaster, and I worked in the Doncaster coalfield for 30 years. And I was elected in 1970 as the NUM branch delegate. And the year after, I was elected under the executive committee of the Yorkshire area.
So the miners' strike, the famous strike, '84, is it something that people should still discuss? Is it important?
Well, it depends what you want to do. It's not important if you think the way things are is the way it should be. But if the miners have always been a politicised workforce, and they've, in a sense, miners' strikes have always been political. It was such a very important part of the bedrock of capitalism that anything the miners did was bound to have an effect on society and the economy. And it's not surprising that the only general strike in history was the miners in 1926, and the biggest single industry strike in the history of the world was in the mines in 1912, when 1.25 million miners in England, Britain rather, Wales and Scotland, went on strike. I think that was the closest we came to an actual revolution, was in that period. So the importance of the 84-5 strike was it was a showdown between organised labour and capitalism in Britain. Now, if you don't think that's important, it won't interest you. But at that time, industrial capitalism, i.e. manufacturing things and making things, was still very, very important to the economy as a whole. Although capitalism itself had gone into speculation on the world market and stock exchange and all of this stuff, it produced mainly steel, coal, shipbuilding, heavy engineering, and all of that. And the proletariat was important. The proletariat was the industrial working class, was considered the cornerstone of a Marxist and a Leninist and other socialist forms of a revolution. Other workers can be exploited and can want to change things, but only the proletariat has got the means in its own hands of building an alternative society. Now, it's true to say that the miners were not the first, but the last of that line. The steel workers had just been defeated by the same man, Ian McGregor. The car workers had been disciplined by Ian McGregor when they brought in him to deal with Red Robo and the people in the factories, and led to a tremendous coup against the militant car workers. The miners were part of a nationalised industry, and a massive cornerstone of working class power. So 85%, sometimes 89% of the national grid, the electricity grid, was supplied by coal. So that was a huge finger on the pulse, or you could say on the carotid artery of capitalism. 100% of those miners were in the National Union of Mine Workers, and nothing really could happen without us. We had tremendous allies on the railway who transported most of the coal, both in Azlef and in the Anua RMT union. So when Thatcher came to break the miners, it wasn't primarily to break the coal industry. She had hoped to keep probably about half or more of the coal industry privatised and sold off to her friends. But first, he had to break the power of the miners' union. We moved from a proletarian industry manufacturing country to a country based on money speculation, the World Bank, and playing the stock exchange, with workers confined to flipping hamburgers and service industry like Deliveroo and those hubs for distribution of goods.
It's in the evening after dark when the blackleg miner creeps to work.
Critics of the strike, they would say it was undemocratic because the MUN didn't have a national ballot. How do you answer those critics?
Well, first of all, you have to recognise that miners could go on strike in several ways. One is they could just down tools and walk out the pit, in which case the pit would be on strike. The rule book says to have a strike you have to have a ballot, but I don't know any pit ever had a ballot for to have a pit strike. You just went to the welfare, everybody went there, and you put your hand up, yea or nay, and that's how we did it. And that happened too on an area level. One pit would pick it out another pit until the majority were on strike. Only where a thing was planned, a strike was planned rather than happened spontaneously, you could have an area ballot. So you see, the National Union wasn't really a national union as such. We were a confederation of different areas. Every area had its own rule book and its own way of doing things. And you could an area could be on strike with a ballot, and they could pick it out all the other areas if it wanted, which is eventually what we did. Well, we had a ballot in 72 and in 74, very successfully. But by the time the 84 strike was coming around, we'd already had a sequence of events happening concerning ballots. There was an intention to bring in the social contract under Callaghan and how that would apply to our industry. They would bring back a national an area incentive scheme, meaning that one area would be paid differently than another area. Well, it took us 100 years to establish a national day wage. And the reason why we had national strikes was because all of the wages and conditions were negotiated nationally. And so everybody looked to the national level for what would happen to their conditions. So that's how the national strikes came about. Well, the area ballot, we rejected it in two conferences, and with Callaghan and Joe Gormley, who was the president, were determined to introduce the incentive scheme. So they were going ahead to introduce the scheme into Nottingham and the Midlands. So we went to court and we said, we've had two national conferences that have rejected the national ballot, and yet the national executive are going ahead with it. And the judge said national conferences aren't decisive and that they may not reflect the actual views of the members. So, all right, we had a national ballot on whether we should accept the incentive scheme. So they then went ahead and started to implement, to allow the Midlands and Nottingham to have the national incentive scheme. So we went back to the court. We said we had the national ballot. He said we should have, and they're still going to implement the scheme. And the judge said national ballots are not decisive on the decision of the NEC. And if the NEC decides to implement a policy, whether it's against national policy or national ballot or not, they shall do it. So when the same areas started bleating about the ballot, Nottingham and Midlands, we pointed to the fact that we'd had ballots before and they took no notice of them. But actually, we considered, Arthur Scarl and others, me included, believed that a hot strike and then a ballot would produce a strike vote in favour. But as it was, it wasn't planned. The manager at Corton Wood Colliery, who had heard on the grapevine his pit was one of them was going to be closed, was going to close Corton Wood. So he flung open his window and shouted to the union delegate, "Hey, they're shutting the pit." So he went back and told the men, and the men at Corton Wood went on strike. And the Corton Wood miners then picketed out all the other pits in Yorkshire. And when we held a meeting in Yorkshire over the pit closures, we said we'd go on strike. So we're having this national delegate conference to decide on a ballot or not. I came back to a mass meeting at Hatfield. There was 1,400 men crammed into that room. and I sensed a terrific hostility in the crowd, and a few people are making angry comments towards me. And when I said, what's up? And they said they've heard you're asking if they want a ballot. So the rumour had went around that the leadership, i.e. us, were trying to sell a strikeout by having a ballot, that we hoped they would go in favour of having a ballot, and we would lose the ballot, and we could then say we were strong and the men were weak, and sell the strikeout. We had no intention whatever of doing that, but that's what they thought. So when they got on the stage, a guy said, "Don't be coming back here asking about the ballot, already on strike." And at that time, only 3 pits in the entire country wasn't working, and they were the ones in Leicestershire. Well, all the Nottingham pits were on strike at that time. So the men said, "We're already on strike." So I got my mandate of the men. And when we went back to that conference, there was 15,000 pickets outside, swaying back and forth in the crowd and singing, "Stuff their ballot up your arse." Now, inside the conference, you were allowed, each delegate was allowed a free vote. So you could vote for any proposition that you liked, or none. We had one proposition from Yorkshire that we didn't have a ballot, and we continued on strike and urged people not to cross picket lines. But there were 6 other resolutions, ranging from where we should have a ballot, but if we don't win the ballot, we still didn't cross the picket lines, which was an attempt to run the circle, square the circle, and others who had various propositions. Now, Arthur Scargill didn't speak in the debate. He was in the chair. And as you know, the chair has to be neutral on the debate. He doesn't vote, so he couldn't vote on it one way or another. And he only spoke at the conclusion of the debate to ask, whatever we decide, we walk out of the room as a united union. Now, as it turns out, we succeeded in that thing. We weren't already on strike, so we stay on strike. So every single miner in the country had the chance to express an opinion through the delegate, and every delegate had a chance to speak at the conference and in the areas. So all the areas decided they wouldn't have a ballot. Now here's the secret. Arthur Scargill expected there would be a ballot, and so did I. And we already had the ballot paper worded. We had it approved by the Electoral Society. We already had the posters printed, urging people to vote on the ballot. Nobody was more surprised that they voted not to have a ballot than we did, and Arthur Scargill. Now, because people have blamed Arthur for it, he's very defensively not bothered telling them that little fact. And plus the fact, because the rank and file didn't want a ballot, it looks a bit silly now that we did. The most biggest we ever had was about 15,000 in one place, which was probably at Orgreave. The vast majority of miners didn't picket, although they stayed on strike and they weren't against the strike. They never picketed it. They stayed at home and looked after the gardens or whatever. And the reason they were able to do that was because the women organised a massive infrastructure in terms of food kitchens, soup kitchens they called them, but they actually provided 3 meals a day, breakfast, dinner and tea time, and that's what kept them on strike. Plus the fact most sympathetic councils fed the children. All the children were given free school meals. But if the women hadn't provided the food and distribution of wood, and they organised holidays, and they took old folks away during that 12 months, I doubt we would have lasted 12 weeks, never mind 12 months. So you could say about 180,000 miners didn't picket. The rest picketed. There never was a strike without active involvement of women. I should say, for the sake of completeness, I had the distinction of abolishing the Coal Queen competition in Britain. There are various committees that they put people on the executive, and they thought the Gala committee was one that was safe to put me on because they couldn't do any harm there. Well, it was during the strike, so I abolished the Yorkshire Coal Queen competition, and they were central to the National Coal Queen, and that completely finished it. I mean, apart from the fact of it being a spectacle, we were on a strike, and this was a coal board competition that they used to make propaganda of. Now, a lot of people liked their daughters and even their wives being involved with it, but it had to go. So on the first gala, when there was no competition, the rest of the executive were able to say it was him. He did it. Quite proud of that, anyway.